Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. This morning we're going to do the meditation. After meditation is going to be Dhamma talk. Talk and meditation both are going to do the Stephen Subodha. Subodha, you can start meditation right now.
All right, let's get into a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Begin with 3 deep breaths. And now let's think thoughts of goodwill, loving kindness, metta, beginning with ourselves. This is a sincere wish, a wholesome desire for our true happiness. We might say to ourselves, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May I live with heart and mind unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May I look after myself with ease, with happiness. And extend your goodwill to your loved ones, your friends, your family, your respected teachers, all those that you hold dear and close to your heart. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And we extend our metta further to our acquaintances, those that we don't know so well, those not so near to our hearts. And for them too, we extend our metta, our goodwill, our loving kindness. May they be happy, may they be peaceful, may they be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And we extend our goodwill even to those that we have difficulty respecting, those that we struggle to get along with, even those that may call us enemy. For them too, we extend our goodwill. May they be happy. May they be peaceful. May they be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And we also extend our metta in all directions to all living beings everywhere. We extend our metta to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, in all directions to all sentient beings everywhere. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May we all live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May we all look after ourselves with ease. And with our hearts and minds uplifted with the metta that we have cultivated, let us now turn our attention to the breath. Feeling the breath coming in, feeling the breath going out. We settle where we feel the breath most strongly, most acutely. where it feels easiest to settle and reside. And from that point, we become familiar with the kind of breathing we're doing. Whether the breath is short or long, heavy, light, deep, shallow. We become aware of the quality of the breathing. We become sensitive to what kind of breathing is pleasant, gratifying. We might even ask ourselves what kind of breathing is especially gratifying right now, and see how the body responds. Breathing in a way that is easy to stay with, easy to focus on. Breathing in a way that keeps you right here and right now. Mindful of the breath, directing the thoughts you have towards the breath, evaluating the breath, and also setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Setting aside all your concerns and thoughts, and only focusing on what's happening right here in your body. Using the breath to connect heart and mind and body. For the duration of this meditation, all you need to do is be right here with each breath, feeling it in the body, allowing yourself to be aware of the breath filling the body, aware that it is the whole body that is breathing. And see if for the remainder of this meditation you can keep your attention here. Anytime you wander, simply come back to the breath. Anytime the mind becomes distracted, come right back here. And continue to do so until you hear the bell.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Subodha, leading the meditation. Right now, you can start your Dhamma talk.
Thank you, Bhante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. When we categorize the Noble Eightfold Path, we tend to break it up into three categories: sila, conduct; samadhi, concentration or meditation; and panya, or wisdom or discernment. And the last few months, my talks, I think, have mostly gravitated in that area of panya, discernment or wisdom. Certainly in talking about right view and right resolve. So I thought today I would spend some time talking about sila, conduct, in regard to right speech, right action, and right livelihood. One of the things that's been important for me is to look at the context under which the Buddha first drew attention to action and conduct. During the Buddha's lifetime, there were many different competing schools, philosophies, religions, we might say. And all of them had their own take on what skillful action was, what skillful conduct was. And amongst all of those schools, I'm really just going to focus on two pretty broad categories, certainly in one regard, very broad, and in one a bit more specific. During the Buddha's lifetime, there were many schools that were Vedantic, meaning that they held the Vedas to be authoritative in terms of how they shaped their religious thought and their religious action. And those schools that held the Vedas as authoritative often thought about action not just in terms of how one conducts one's affairs, but also action in regard to ritual action and ritual purity. A lot of the stuff that was done was very much ritualized around their whole daily activities, but also in terms of special attention that they wanted to receive from various divinities, devas. And in some cases, performing in such a way that they would receive certain boons, certain good things that would come to them because they had done particular rituals. For example, fire rituals that they would perform and do a certain way, and they would receive some benefit, they believed, from the gods. Ritual purity in the sense of various taboos, things they could and couldn't do depending on what caste they were born into or various modes of life they walked, and so on. Their world was very rigid and structured around these various taboos and ritual purity. On the other end of things, you had different groups that did not hold the Vedas as authoritative. These were renunciant traditions that often had ascetics, called samanas, right? And the Buddha is a part of that system. And one of those other competing schools of the time were the Jains. And the Jains also, like the Buddhist tradition, put a lot of emphasis on action, not in terms of ritual, but action in terms of one's personal actions, what one does in one's life, one's conduct. In this realm, we're talking about karma. But the way the Jains approached karma was very different from the way we Buddhists approach karma. Where for us, karma is this thing that, sure, we've generated lots of karma in the past, but the emphasis is a lot on what we're producing right now and how we're producing it and what we're doing. Where, at least in my understanding of what I've seen in studying the Jains, there's this idea that karma, both good or bad, needs to be burned off before anyone can achieve any kind of lasting peace or happiness. And that includes all the karma of the past. Meaning, in their eyes, they perform renunciation as a kind of penance, meaning that they see their life as, from right now, looking backward. I've done all of these things, and I have to burn off all of that karma from this point onward to have any lasting peace. And that can lead to some very interesting practices. I recently watched a documentary that it's fairly current. I think the documentary is maybe only, I don't know, 10, 15 years old, if it's even that. And it was about a woman who is a Jain in India who was going through the steps to become a nun, to become a renunciant in that tradition. And I was intrigued to watch this documentary because I had been told by other people that, like Jainism is a part of the Samana tradition that the Buddha was a part of. There's a lot of similarities there. They would tell me there's a lot of similarities. And so I went into it going, okay, like I've even heard certain people say, if Buddhism didn't exist in the world, I would be a Jain because it's that close. And I thought, wow, okay. So I was intrigued, wanting to know more, and I'm still intrigued, wanting to know more. But I went into this documentary thinking, okay, well, let's see. And with that open mind that I had, I did watch. And the thing is I didn't really see much that looked all that comparable or close to me. The way I envision it, it's sort of like when someone on the outside listens to someone speaking English and someone speaking German and go, wow, those languages are very similar. And both the English speaker and the German speaker are looking at each other extremely confused because they clearly didn't understand each other. And that's kind of how I felt watching this documentary, where this person was practicing renunciation, but in a way I didn't recognize. For example, one of the things that this young woman had to do as a part of her ordination was to ritualistically tear out her own hair, which is one of the practices that some of the Jains do, which rather than shaving of the head, Jain monastics every 6 months or so tear out their own hair. But the first time when you're ordaining, people take turns. And so I saw the young woman sitting there, and one of the teachers goes up and just starts going like this. And you just see the hair start kind of melting away. And everyone in the community joined in. A lot of women came up and they're all doing it less skillfully than the teacher. The teacher really got the method down. A lot of these women maybe did not have that method down, but they were pulling and ripping at the hair and rubbing ash and stuff on it until it was all gone, except for 5 strands that her primary teacher, her preceptor, would then rip off at the very end when she was officially a nun. And I got to say, it was very interesting watching that, and watching a lot of other stuff too. I also saw the way that the Jain monastics eat, which is not with the use of a bowl, but rather eating directly into their hands. And so they stand there, and there will be a circle of people feeding them, putting food directly in their hands, and they sift the food around to make sure that there are no bugs or anything like that, that any living thing they might be consuming with their food, because they are that committed to nonviolence that they check and inspect their food very thoroughly. But I got to say, I saw my own visceral reaction to the hair pulling, and this was for this woman an act of real renunciation. They ask her afterward, like, well, did it hurt at all? And she's like, well, of course it hurt. But she says, but I'm renouncing all of my attachments and everything, so I just let the pain be. Like, no big deal. And I reflected on myself, where I'm like, well, I feel like at this point I'm pretty detached from a lot of sensuality and a lot of other things, but I realized upon watching this documentary that I'm still pretty attached to my scalp and will not be doing this kind of practice myself. This look I have today was not because I ripped my hair out. I used a razor. I feel very comfortable doing so. But it's my understanding that the Jains don't use razors to shave their heads because they're afraid that they might kill a little bug or any kind of creature that might be living in their scalp, right, living in their hair. So they're that afraid of potentially harming a creature that they think it is more humane to tear out their hair. Which I was watching this documentary with a lot of other Buddhists, including monastics, and I saw a few of them just sort of not wanting to watch, just sort of shocked, not only by that, but also the ritual nudity of many of the Jain monastics who go, as they call, sky-clad, clothed in the sky. They renounce even their clothes and walk around naked. So I bring all this up to show that there are different ways, even during the Buddha's time, that people were approaching action and conduct. And a lot of the practices that I saw in that documentary were practices that go all the way back. These were practices that the Buddha would have seen. And before his discovery of the middle way, some of those practices he had done himself. Severe austerity practices, including being naked and so on. And so it's contrasting the two, this sort of ritual conduct and ritual purity, hoping for boons and various things, and on the other side, the Jain hard asceticism that the Buddha finds his own middle way, which I think is interesting because in the West, when we talk about the middle way, I think we're not always quite sure what the middle way means. And in fact, I would say that in Buddhism, we talk about the middle way in kind of two spheres. There's sort of the philosophical sense where we talk about the eternalists and the nihilists who are talking about selfhood a certain way. And the Buddha discerns a middle way between eternalism and nihilism to come to some understanding of the way we approach selfhood as more of a strategy than any statement about reality. But then on the other hand, in terms of our own practice, our conduct, there's also this middle way too, where we're not putting our faith in rites and rituals. We're not praying and doing things a certain way, like it's only 12 steps this way and then 11 this way, and then we got to light the candle and walk around and do the, there's not that kind of stuff going on. But we're also not practicing austerities to that extent. Certainly not viewing karma as something that must be burned off in this penance kind of way, that you have to suffer to find your way to enlightenment, suffer your way to unbinding. I think one good example comes out of the Khuddaka Nikaya, which I'll have to use a device to read the sutta I want to read to you today, just because if you know what the Khuddaka Nikaya is, it's a collection of like so many different books that they would all be a bunch of books onto themselves. So this is out of the Udana, so I have to read it from a device because I don't actually have it in print. And this is the Udana 5.4, Boys, Kumara Sutta. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in Jetta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. And on that occasion a large number of boys on the road between Savatthi and Jetta's Grove were catching fish. Then early in the morning the Blessed One adjusted his underrobe and, carrying his bowl and robes, went into Savatthi for alms. He saw the large number of boys on the road between Savatthi and Jetta's Grove catching little fish. Seeing them, he went up to them, and on arrival said to them, "Boys, do you fear pain? Do you dislike pain?" "Yes, Lord, we fear pain. We dislike pain." Then, on realizing the significance of that, the Blessed One on that occasion exclaimed, "If you fear pain, if you dislike pain, don't anywhere do an evil deed in open or in secret. If you're doing or will do an evil deed, you won't escape pain catching up as you run away." So I like this as an example because it shows the Buddha coming upon something that to many cultures is quite common. It's people fishing, probably fishing to get the fish, to kill them, to eat them, and so on. And his question to them is quite immediate. Like, do you enjoy pain? And of course the response is the response that any one of us would give. Of course we don't enjoy pain. And it's in light of that that he then says to reflect on one's actions. But notice that when he talks about the actions that are catching up to us, he's not talking about actions in the past. He makes it a very, very immediate. He says what you're doing and what you plan to do. Meaning that for those of us practicing this path, we have whatever past we've done. And because all of our lifetimes in this realm of rebirth go far, far before we can even conceive, there's no conceivable beginning that we can grasp. If we were trying to do this thing of burning off all of the bad that we've done before we could attain any good, we'd be really, really, really in trouble. The Buddha emphasizes something different. He emphasizes, what are you doing right now? And what are you planning to do in the near future? And so even in his potentially scolding these boys, depending on how you look at it, it's looking at their immediate actions in the present and in the future. And so that's one of the ways that we can look at action. So with that in mind, let's look at the path factors themselves, which we can kind of discuss really in terms of precepts, because skillful speech is sort of worked into the precepts as well. But we'll look at skillful speech and skillful action and skillful livelihood. When we talk about speech, we tend to break it up into 4 categories in terms of our conduct, of the things that we're trying to avoid, but also the things we're trying to cultivate. In terms of what we're trying to avoid, we're trying to avoid telling lies. We're trying to avoid divisive speech. We're trying to avoid harsh speech. And we're trying to avoid idle chatter or gossip. In terms of skillful action, we're trying to avoid not taking life, trying to avoid taking what is not freely given, trying to avoid any kind of sexual misconduct, avoid various things that lead to heedlessness, and so on. In terms of our livelihood, we're trying to make sure that whatever we do is in alignment with precepts. It's actually one of those interesting things that in the Pali Suttas, the Buddha is actually kind of vague about what skillful livelihood is. He doesn't quite specify exactly what it is and what it isn't. When it comes to monks, he tends to fall back on what it means to be a skillful monk. To have right livelihood is to reflect on the good that you've received from the community and not letting it go to waste. You have these requisites that the community has given you to practice. You have shelter, you have clothing, you have medicine, you have a place to stay, you can meditate, you can practice, you can cultivate. Don't put it to waste. And that's the skillful livelihood of a monk. When it comes to a lay person, it's a bit more vague in the sense that, like, well, just make sure that what you're doing isn't harmful. And then later on, in other suttas that are kind of related and kind of not, he does then specify various kind of work that doesn't seem to be all that skillful, the kind of work that for him goes past anything that he would deem as right livelihood. And it's the kind of stuff that you would expect. You know, people dealing in intoxicants, people dealing in poison, people dealing in lives, whether that be the selling of other people, whether it be the selling of animals meant for slaughter, whether it actually means being the one that does the slaughtering of animals and so on, are the kind of things that he views as not skillful, not right livelihood. But then he comes up with these other examples that I think are worth talking about, because it tends to affect people now viscerally when they hear that, which is the way we talk about soldiers. There's an example that I find really powerful where there is a warrior, a soldier, that comes to the Buddha, and he says, you know, I've been told that if I were to die in battle, I get to go to heaven. That if I'm doing the business of slaying my kingdom's enemies, then I get to rejoice in some paradise. And he asks the Buddha, is that true? And the Buddha at first decides not to answer. He's just like, I'm not going to answer that question. And then the soldier asks again, no, but please tell me, well, is that true? Will I go to heaven? The Buddha again decides maybe he's not going to answer. But then the soldier asks a third time, and you know, as we often see in the suttas, when someone asks a third time, it shows their persistence, their real desire to know what the Buddha has to say. And so then he turns to the soldier and he says, well, anyone who dies with ill will in their heart, and the Buddha is insinuating that anytime you want to harm someone, whether it be to injure or kill them, you have ill intentions. And anyone who dies with ill intentions often is born in a hell realm. So I really don't see any chance of you ending up in heaven while dying in battle. You will go to hell, right? One of the hell realms. And the soldier starts crying right then and there. You know, he's sobbing, and the Buddha says, well, and that's kind of why I didn't want to tell you. And then the soldier looks at me and says, no, I'm crying because my teachers lied to me, right? And so that's that moment that they have together that's quite sad. Another example, which, especially because here in Los Angeles, there's a lot of industry people, it's one of those things we have to keep in mind and figure out what the Buddha meant here, is that one time a stage performer, an actor, comes up to the Buddha and he says, I put on a lot of performances, and I've been told by certain teachers that I'll get to go to the heaven of laughter after I die because of my work as an actor. And is that true? And the Buddha considers for a while, and the guy's like, "Come on, let me know, tell me." And the Buddha says, finally, he goes, "Well, okay, here's the thing. If as an actor you are encouraging in others greed, hatred, delusion, or ignorance, what's more likely is you'll be born in the hell of laughter, where rather than people laughing with you, they'll be laughing at you." The kind of the gist of the conversation. So let's hone in on this idea of skillful livelihood in that sense. Suppose someone is in that industry. I like to think of someone like Fred Rogers. It's kind of funny because you'd think as a grown man I'd be over Mr. Rogers, but I still love him so much. And he's an interesting figure to me because he was someone that very much was about making television, specifically for children, but making television, who himself really didn't watch any TV. If you read his biography, he'd turn on the TV for a little bit to watch something he thought was kind of funny, like he knew that like the beginning of a particular show had a funny introduction, and he'd go, "Okay," and he'd turn to his kids and his wife and go, "That was enough, right? That was good, wasn't it?" He'd turn the TV off and then go on with the rest of their day. But when it came to what he was producing, he put a lot of thought into what he was doing, a lot of thought into the way things were worded and what kind of messages were being put across. So an example, I think, of someone being really skillful. The funny thing is that it's not like I sit here as someone who doesn't watch TV or movies. One of my things that I've carried over, even as after all these years of practice, is that I still like to watch horror movies. And so I would hate to think that all of the actors and everyone involved in the horror that I watch would end up in some hell where everyone's laughing at them. But I will say that over time, the kind of horror that I enjoy has shifted dramatically. When I was a kid, it was kind of the same thing with comedy. I would love everything that I would come across in terms of comedy, in terms of horror. It was all good. Everything was good. I had no discernment whatsoever. It was all good. But over time, I couldn't really get into the stuff that was just very, very visceral, very exploitive, very just violent and titillating, meant to elicit these kind of, I don't know, negative qualities in people. Like I've never been one for like what they call torture porn and things like that. And certainly now that's the kind of stuff that I would not watch. I tend to like the stuff that's a little supernatural, stuff that's a little spooky, but also stuff that has actually very good, wholesome messages when you get down to it. The kind of stuff where when you really get down to what the message of the movie is, it's about needing to, let's say, defeat your inner demons before you're going to have any success defeating any outer demons. And that's the kind of stuff that I find useful. Or rather, the kind of things that I can say are okay to watch for myself, because at least there's some good message there. So in terms of our actions, I think it's important to focus on skillful livelihood, because when we look at that, oftentimes for those of us who are Buddhists, we've heard a lot of talks about skillful speech, and many of us can rattle off all the things about not telling lies and not being harsh or divisive, not gossiping, things like that. And the same thing with action. Any of us who've been practicing for a while have practiced the 5 precepts to some extent and with some regularity or success. But in terms of livelihood, I think we start turning into another interesting direction, which is not only what are we doing, but also what are we encouraging others to do, which for me is something that I find important to highlight for myself as I think about the kind of person I am in my day-to-day life and what I encourage people to do. But also as all of us practicing, whether we be monastic or lay or some kind of weird spot in between. When we think about our speech, when we think about our conduct, when we think about what we say and what we do, it's not just for our own benefit, not just for our own protection, but it's also for the benefit and protection of others. This example of the Buddha scolding those boys for catching the fish, and presumably to kill them and eat them, notice that what he says about pain is in itself very universal. He's not just talking about their pain, he's talking about the fish's pain. You know, for the boys there might be some future pain, but for the fish there's pain happening right then and there. Even catch and release fishing can be really harmful to the fish. They end up maimed a lot of the time. And so our conduct, not just what we do, but what we encourage and what we put out there into the world, is a kind of protection. It's a kind of safety. And we see that kind of emphasis even in the metta that we cultivate. You'll notice that even in the different versions we might say here, but certainly in the one that I tend to do in my meditation with all of you, is this focusing on protection from harm, protection from suffering. And one of the ways that we can ensure that is by making sure that our conduct is in alignment with what the Buddha had to say on skillful action. So I think I will end there. Hopefully this has been useful to you in some way. And I would, of course, welcome any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask you something.
Sure.
Do the Jains participate in any other self-flagellation rituals besides ripping out their own hair?
I think it depends. I will say this, that at their most extreme, they are trying to cut off all action. So to think about it this way, in the Buddhist scheme of things, we can categorize all actions in terms of skillful and unskillful. But for the Jains, ultimately, even skillful action ends up furthering becoming. There's more life that happens. So for them, their monastics, they get to a certain point where they want to stop all action. And so what that means is they enter a period of their life where they no longer talk, and eventually that means they no longer eat. And then at its most extreme, they no longer drink water, and then they allow themselves to desiccate and die in the forest. And for them, for some of those, that's the height of their practice. That's someone who's on his way to becoming a sage. That's someone who's trying to achieve liberation. And so for them, their austerities can and does lead to their death, which is a take that I definitely don't agree with. I wouldn't want to be too disparaging in my remarks about it, but their views on karma logically lead to that conclusion, that all action eventually is harmful. So all action must be stopped.
Harmful to what?
To themselves and life in general is what they would believe, what they would say, yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for your wonderful Dhamma talk. When you're talking about the karma, I just suddenly remember the Sutta, Upali Sutta, wonderful Sutta discussion about the Jainas kind of karma and all that stuff. Kind of like, it reminds me like how wonderful the discussion went on with the Buddha and Upali. It's wonderful. You remind me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, I think that's really something important for us as Buddhists to understand about karma, because, over the centuries, some of the views on karma that the Buddha would have absolutely been against rather, have kind of come back in certain ways. Like even the views of very ironic karma, where if you're a kid and you're on a ledge and you start peeing off the ledge and you end up peeing on someone's head, Like there might be some commentator out there who says, well then for 500 years you'll be swimming in a lake of urine or something like that. Like it gets kind of comical sometimes. And the Buddha really wasn't focused on that kind of stuff, you know. The way he understood it is that your actions, of course, are like planting seeds in a field. But if you've ever been a gardener, you know that sometimes you plant seeds and they sprout really fast. Like you come back a week later and there's already something coming out of the ground. Other times, something takes a long time to start growing before it really starts germinating and before it breaks the soil. And there are also plenty of seeds that you plant and nothing ever happens. The conditions are never quite right for those to come up. And it's the same way with our good and bad karma. There's plenty of bad karmic seeds that have been planted that will never come out of the ground. There's seeds that have been planted and there's nothing's going to happen, right? Nothing. But there's also plenty of bad that we, will feel in some way. But the point of the matter is we have this present moment where we are still actively planting seeds. And we can choose, we have a choice to plant good seeds. And some of those seeds will come to fruition in the future, close to the present, or in the very far future, or not at all. But the Buddha points out that here's this path that is a karmic path that leads to the end of karma. And it's one where we step by step use good karma to reach that point, which is contrasted by some of these other takes where you're relying on magic to do the work for you, or you're trying to stop all action entirely to your detriment. So that would be one way of looking at the middle way, which is quite stark and scary, but a lot of the philosophies that the Buddha was arguing against during his lifetime were quite scary. So there's that. Yeah.
It seemed like the Buddha was interested in coming up with something that worked for people. He himself being a prince, I think his perspective was what he can offer to his people that will make their life better. And he explored the roads of ascetics, suffering along those lines, and then came up with what he thought was the middle way that people could live with. And, you got 1 billion Buddhists trying to live with it today, so.
Yeah. I mean, that's true to an extent. Like he did continue to stay as an ascetic, technically. Like he was a samana the whole time. Once he left his role as a prince, like as a some type of royalty, let's say, he never went back to it. Like he continued to live in the forest. He lived amongst other monks. I think for him, he realized that there were some actions that could be skillfully used to derive pleasure and happiness that were not derived sensually, which I think is something that certain philosophers, like certain schools of philosophy like the Jains, are afraid of, that to have any kind of happiness is a sensual happiness. So you have to get rid of all happiness. And he's saying, no, there is a kind of happiness that's not sensually derived. In often cases, it's the kind of happiness that comes up from living skillfully and meditating. So.
Thank you, Subodha. I think we don't have time that much. So thanks for the wonderful Dhamma talk. We will chant page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all.
Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. When ye do konga duk fokap unyate nadang du chonga sangye gyai kong thai pa dao. When ye tu kang duk pokap unya te ngadang du chung sangye gai kong thai pa dao. When ye tu kong duk pokap unya te ngadang du chung sangye gai kong thai pa dao.
Thank you again. I think we have tea and cookies. So next Sunday, coming Sunday, Reverend Sanat Vihari, we call Mexican American monks. He's going to give a Dhamma talk. He's coming to here in our temple, and he's going to give a Dhamma talk. Make sure to come and join with us next Sunday. I think that's right now the announcement. And we are thinking, not 100% sure, we are planning to do the Vesak, I believe the 18th or 19th, Subodha?
It's the 19th.
It's 19th. May 19th, the Vesak celebration. And we're going to give a Dhamma talk, puja, and the dana for the monks, and the lunch for everybody. Please come and join. May 19, Buddha's birthday, birth, enlightenment, and passing away we celebrate. So please come and join the 19th May. That's it right now. So by the power of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, you all be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.